My next guest is Narelle Chidwick, and I found her on Instagram. Her tagline is midlife, real life, and she's so real. I love what she shares. So I asked her to be on today to speak about the relevance of bone health from perimenopause phase, so let's say 40s and beyond. We have to pay attention to our bones earlier than we thought we did, and when we do, we can actually slow down, stop, and reverse bone loss and even osteoporosis. So listen to this great interview with Narelle Chidwick on the relevance of bone health as we age.
Hi, Debbie. Great to see you.
Yes, it is. I reached out to you on Instagram because you popped up in my feed and you were sharing really fun and kind of like taking the pressure off of life reels. And I loved that.
Oh, thank you. I'm so pleased it resonated. I found you because I was diagnosed with osteoporosis in May of 2024 and I was clueless. So my first go-to was podcasts to just find some people, and your whole podcast resonated with me. And then I thought, well, I spent a fair bit of time on Instagram. I wanted to follow you on Instagram, and it's been really nice to connect throughout this year because you are without a doubt one of the big parts of my, what I would call support unit in helping me look at my aging and my longevity and really what to next. And you've given me a massive amount of hope. So thank you.
Wow, and I didn't even know that. So, I mean, that's, that honestly is part of, it's so much work to do what I do, all the facets of business and getting out there and sharing and all of that. And I have my story that got me here. But what really drives me is when I hear things like what you're saying. And when I realize what exists out there, or rather what doesn't exist, all of the confusion, the misinformation, and maybe even lack of information. And that's why these kinds of interviews that we're going to have, especially today, our discussion on relevancy, like what are the things we need to focus on and why do we need to focus? So you were diagnosed in your late 40s.
Yeah, I was 49. I went through, well, I didn't really ever think about it, relatively early menopause. I was 46. So if you roll back a few years, everyone can work out kind of when that was. I've recently turned 50. And yeah, my dad has osteoporosis and osteopenia in his spine and in his hip. And, I didn't understand, again, the relevancy of perhaps what family history and whether a gene was to switch on or not, or just really actually what aging was going to realistically look like. And for me, it's brought up lots of things, looking at chronological age and biological age and things that are potentially going to happen to us, but we may have been able to do something about it in advance. And so I think for everything that, I've experienced this year, like you said, this real lack of information and quite a lot of, I think, ultimately fear mongering. That's really all I can sort of put it there. That first thing of how do we stop and listen? I never really thought about what it was. My dad was diagnosed when he was 70. That's 10 years ago. However, he had a vitamin D deficiency over 30 years ago. Now, he lived in Papua New Guinea. I grew up in Papua New Guinea, so it's quite close to the equator. I also then spent my teenage years in Australia. He's been in Australia, for years, decades and decades. And again, there are little things that are sort of all coming together. But the lifestyle part, like you talk about, and so many people do, and has been very part of my sort of, I would say, holistic journey that I've taken with myself in the last 7 years, is looking at all the different facets that make us who we are ultimately, and where we get those different priorities in order, and what's, again, relevant to today and the world that we're living in. So, I mean, there's so much to explore. So I'm really looking forward to chatting more about relevancy with you.
Okay, so just what you said there. You used the word potential, the potential. And I think that what the old-fashioned perspective has been, you get older, you're going to lose bone, you're going to potentially get osteoporosis. But what then comes into play is the lifestyle that we have that gets us there. And then, so that was one aspect, was, is this inevitable? And then the other piece was the inevitability of genetics. And what is the genetic component of osteoporosis? And when you look at the genetic component, honestly, where I see the biggest relationship is the size of the person. So the smaller petite women had smaller petite moms and grandmas that had osteoporosis. And the DEXA scan that we use to diagnose it is an X-ray. And the smaller the bones they're looking at, the higher the numbers are going to be, or really the higher negative numbers. So it's not really, to me, the genetic aspect doesn't really it's not what we think it is. It's things like what you just said. Your dad lived in a country where maybe he was or wasn't exposed to either the sun for synthesis or the foods to create the vitamin D, or do you call it vitamin D?
Vitamin, yeah.
Tomato. So that was an interesting component for me there as well. Cause, for men, like men don't actually, usually they don't have osteoporosis at the rates women do. And so when you hear your dad does, I think that would probably be even more profound, like, whoa, even more likely that you could. So there's a lot there with what you just said.
So much there. And I've got numerous siblings. So for me, that was one of the first things I was like, actually, if this has happened to me, what about what's happening to you guys? And one of the things that I had been unfortunately getting over the last few years was I was hurting my ribs, and whether they were fractures or breaks, but they were taking between 6 to 8 weeks to heal. So not just the disruption of sleep that I had, the difficulties to sneeze, to laugh, to smile, to be hugged, so much just around that. But that when my brother had pneumonia at the beginning of last year, he cracked a rib sneezing. Now he had pneumonia, so we just put it down to that. But that was one of my first things. He's mid-30s. And I was like, please just go get a marker for now. Just work out what your baseline is and start doing something actively so you don't get to my age and only again because of the family potential. And he again, I would say, although he's very tall, he probably again is slighter in terms of frame, which again, like you said, can slightly perhaps is it distort or can affect the numbers that we get to an extent. But again, just what are you doing to ensure that everything that you're doing is the best that you can possibly do today for you, depending on where we go in the future. So that for me has really been, the same as my other sisters. They're close to 40, like early 40s. They're my half siblings. But again, it still will all follow through. And depending when they hit, again, this mass fall of estrogen and this decline that, again, I was really oblivious to. And I think I'm pretty clued up. And I think I chat about a lot of things, absorb information, but I really just did not hear what osteoporosis was, what bone breakdown really was. And it's really made me, again, just stop and process. And I think that's with everything. And even elements that I try to do on my socials and people that I work with is just like, what are those niggles? I've talked about even on my Instagram before, things like the fat deposits going in my face years ago, feeling this sort of body just being sapped, getting really dry skin, seeing the brittleness in my nails, seeing my hair thin, all of these other markers. Yeah, sure, menopausal things, but at the same time, stress levels around that, let alone bad sleep with other things. I was just like, oh my God, have I just literally been allowing myself to eat my bones? And there's so much around that I've gone really, really deep in the last 6 months to get myself into a place of, it's okay. You've got this. You've got all the tools in the world that you can find, access for free, for paid, for, anyway, family support units. And how can you build basically this big network to keep you going as well? So, I've gone to all different places, but I think the biggest thing for me, was the fear part. And I don't want anyone to ever be in that place of what the actual, like, really? How when I look at this physical number, is that like literally bones of an 80-year-old? And I know it's not, because you have to look at age and stage and relevancy to today at 49, now 50, being diagnosed with that. My mobility, I think, is relatively good. My joints, my tendons, my ligaments, everything is doing what they should be doing. I'm pretty good at balancing. I'm relatively agile. I've got my cognition. So for all of that, I'm like, oh my gosh, it actually could not have been better that I knew now rather than 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, because all of those factors would potentially be different then. So, I'm now looking at it as, it's a bonus, isn't it? It's great that I know now I can do something about it.
It
So,
is. And,
yeah,
it is, and here's the thing, bone loss starts in our 30s.
I
So bone
know,
loss
right?
begins in our 30s.
Yeah. I mean, I never knew that until this year. And you're like, again, and I think this is, again, we're all living in this world now where we're hearing lots of it. Like my 20-year-old, he is very active, goes to the gym. He is, again, all part of future health, future him. He knows what he's doing. He's eating proteins. He is resting. Totally been times when they haven't. But again, he is living in exactly the same world that I am living in. And I think when you pull all of those things together, and I just had my dad here recently as well, so you've got 80, 50, 20, and all of us living in this exact same world, hearing relatively nuanced things, hitting different milestones from whether it's looking through a lens of wisdom, age, experience, and that they're hearing it. My kids are hearing it, and not just from me of you've got to look after yourself. And I think, again, the male versus female thing is also different, isn't it? Because young boys, they want to be buff. They want to build muscle. They want this kind of different physicality that women, perhaps in our own, just by circumstance, by generation, very much so, have been influenced that we want to look perhaps differently. And like you were saying, in terms of, I don't classify myself as petite. I am 5'4", so I'm an average height here in the UK. My weight, though, has been, I would say, relatively balanced and stable over the decades. It's been sort of little peaks and troughs and different things and multiple children and where things can kind of, let's say, go off the rails at little points in times. But even with that, initially I was like, oh, I've never had any form of disordered eating. But then with this diagnosis, I kind of sat there and went, actually, but if some of that control and stresses that I've been putting on myself, maybe there has been some elements of disorder by the boundaries that I've put in amongst myself. Does that kind of make sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense because the
Yeah.
main root causes of bone loss, stress is one of them. And what does
I know,
stress
right?
mean?
Yeah, my dad and I could not shout about that more. And again, whether it's like childhood trauma that has dribbled through, whether it's low-grade stresses, whether it's, the little traumas, the big traumas, this baseline. I fundamentally, and I know, and I've done so much work over this, even over the decades, of my levels of expectations and high achievement and goal setting and real sort of functionality and hitting targets and, being the person that I could totally do everything if I put my mind to it. But actually, it took me a long time, probably till about 7 years ago, to realize that I totally can do everything and have everything, just not at the same time. And so getting that in balance and really working out what my big sacrifices are. And I'm now at this point where I was like, I can't sacrifice my own health. That sounds very, very dramatic, but at the baseline thing, and I think it's something that I might have even seen on your page of this, what are you doing every day for bone building or bone dissolving?
Yeah.
And that's something that's really stuck with me, again, in terms of not being hyper-focused or stressed again that I'm not doing this or I'm not doing that. It's like, overall, actually, it was a good day. I've done some good things. I've hit lots of targets. Totally, anyway, there's so much around it.
Yeah, but you brought up some things. I do use those terms because I know the word dissolving. I know
Yeah.
that fear with the diagnosis. I know that internal X-ray that we do of our own selves going into. I used to look at I wonder. You live in the UK. There's a thing called a crunchy bar, which has chocolate on the outside, honeycomb on the inside.
Yeah.
I used to wonder, like, what are my bones honeycomb? I used to visualize the top of the femur bone, maybe because I looked at it and I was so into it at this point. And there's a neck of the femur, which the DEXA scan looks at, and the ball. And I used to wonder, will that break off? And where would I be? I mean, I really I was in, like you said, we started and you talked about the fear of the diagnosis because that
Oh,
is the biggest thing, right?
yeah.
Um, but yeah, it really is every day, all day. Everything we do, you mentioned the word lifestyle. It is a lifestyle. It's not a supplement. It's not a food. It's not how much protein. It's not
Mm,
a exercise. It's everything.
yeah.
But if you can look at whether it's the end of the day or even during the day, when you are opening up the refrigerator, you're making a decision, or you're out at a restaurant, you're making a decision of your food. There are certain foods, gluten off the table. And I even wondered as you were speaking about your family history, could you guys potentially have an extra gluten sensitivity in your family lineage? Because that's going to affect absorption of nutrients, bone building nutrients.
Mm,
So when you're eating at the restaurant, at your refrigerator, am I going to build my bones with this, or will I contribute to dissolving? And you think differently. You make different choices when you approach it. Not
mm.
scared, not negative, not out of control, not in a manner of total control, but rather lifestyle, be gentle with yourself. And is this going to build or is it going to dissolve?
Absolutely. I was tested for celiac. So again, to look at the gluten levels, and my numbers were okay. Had thyroid tests. So I've kind of had every test under the sun, it seemed, at different points at times. And I've had two different full sets of bloods. My vitamin D levels are showing okay. My calcium is okay. So, again, it's tricky, isn't it? But then my last one, my calcium was low. And I'd been, again, it's so variable, but I think like you were saying, this whole not just looking at what you're choosing, but I'm a massive convert to tracking and putting symptoms down and really looking at, and this is even prior to being diagnosed, looking at different inflammatory markers and working out like even things, like swelling. And I had Raynaud's years ago. I was diagnosed with it, where your tips go really white. And again, not realizing that was a potential circulation issue as well. And so there's lots of elements that I've been looking at again with my sort of own health in advance of this diagnosis. And I think looking at all the facets of life, what's out of whack at different points in times. But what I really hadn't appreciated again until this year, because my discovery of, let's say, osteoporosis was partly I'd been away skiing and I had a fall. I'd hurt my groin, I'd hurt my ribs again. But I had a doctor's appointment booked in because I'd been struggling with really bad incontinence, both bladder and bowel. And it was something that had flared up at the beginning of last year. And then a really big flare again at the beginning of 2024 when I did a Veganuary month. So he stimulated my gut in a whole different way. And so the first thing my doctor was like, oh, actually, there's a few different markers going on here. We talked about my dad, and that's when they sent me off for a DEXA. But, I think getting your body into this, the parasympathetic nervous system, which is, I have been aware of probably, I would say, for about 4 or 5 years. It was pre 2000 that had been in my head of understanding the sort of metabolic system, trying to get my body into some kind of metabolic balance, really stripping out ultra processed foods, looking at, I wouldn't say I had a particularly bad diet or bad input, but I have drunk at different periods and times of my life excessively, and I've kind of always been this person that's kind of been kind of all or nothing. And you're either on or you're off. And so all of that, I can't hang on a second, just where do I find this harmony that where everything is working together? But the pelvic floor part and the whole parasympathetic nervous system, your thoracic spine, everything connected to my neural pathway. I'm just like, my mind has been blown this year with all the things that I simply didn't know that I needed to know. Now I know them. I'm like, oh my God, it's all come together.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love how curious you are and hungry you are for information, and everything happens as it should. Where you are in this journey and what you're doing and the fact that you're able to help get this information out. Now, in listening to your story, I'm going to tell you I'm a functional health coach. I run functional labs. So the
Yeah.
celiac test, very, very few people are celiac. So almost nobody is going to come up with that.
Yeah.
but most people are gluten sensitive, and I run blood tests for gluten sensitivity, and that's gonna contribute to poor digestion. And when you were talking about incontinence and then with evacuation, when we see issues with bowels, that's gonna be indicative of gut health. So I'm going and I'm thinking, what's the state of your gut? And do you have good gut bacteria? Do you have opportunistic species? Do you have yeast overgrowth? Do you have parasites? Do you have enough digestive capacity? All things that are found on a stool lab. And so I'm like kind of analyzing what, as you're telling me about your dad and your stuff and your things, I'm thinking of the markers you've shared. You talked about markers. Now, nails, having flimsy nails is an indicator of some mineral imbalances. Well,
I
your
know.
bones are,
They're
that's
good
where the
right now.
minerals are stored. They're what?
They're good right now.
Okay, so and if they're good right now, so then that must mean that right now your digestion, your absorption, and your intake of minerals, whether it's through food or supplement, is optimal. And
Yeah.
so that's a good marker. And that's,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that that's what I'm getting from you. That I'm not as organized, structured, and tracking as I would like to be. I'm becoming more. I'm telling myself that that's what I'm going to work on. Is becoming more of that. But some of the things we can pay attention to, because I think that that's what would be really important here, is a lot of what we've discussed. And so that is one thing to look at, is to look at your nails. And if you could push your nails and bend your nails, then you've got some mineral stuff going on. Is that because your digestion is off or your absorption is off? Is that because you're not bringing in enough calcium in your food, not in your supplements, but in your food? Vitamin D optimized, magnesium, vitamin K, like the four musketeers of bone health, but also all the cofactors. You need copper and boron and manganese. You need a nutrient-rich diet. And honestly, most of the nutrients that build bones are in nuts, seeds, fruits, and vegetables. And of
Absolutely.
course we need protein from,
Yeah.
good sourced animal. But
Yeah. Yeah.
that's so building, dissolving, what are the markers? You talked about sleep. Your bones get tired. And
Yeah.
if they get tired, they're going to dissolve. So you have to get optimal sleep.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? But yeah, all of the markers, and I've even all my girlfriends, I said it with their nails because a lot of people everywhere are painting their nails with that shellac and the things that really coat your nails. And that again distorts what's actually happening with your nails. But I think one of the big things that I've never ventured down that route. Um, so I kind of am aware of my nails, but there were definitely times when you had events or different things and would put nail varnish on, and then I would take it off, and not just the discoloration, but then I would be like, "Ooh, hang on a second," because you've got that marked contrast. And I think that's the other thing when you take off a layer of anything, isn't it? Whether you put yourself into a different environment, you can then go, "Hang on a sec. This is a little bit out of kilter or out of sorts." And it's when you stop and look at it that you can really notice more things going on. And it's really fascinating again, because I love the functional side that you actively discuss and promote. And have found that with a little bit of difficulty, I roll back to mid last year when I'd gone to Thailand on holidays and I hadn't been particularly well and lots of different niggles. And even that part of looking at aches and pains and this general feeling of weakness and heaviness that I was having, obviously perhaps precursors of what was actually going on within my body, came back to the doctors and I lost like 5 kilos within like 10 days. Really weird, abnormal weight loss. But both my son and I did. So we were like, maybe we had picked up a parasite, different thing. And I went to the doctors with this list of like this niggle, that niggle, and other ongoing things, and was unfortunately dismissed with the, "Why are you tracking these things? Like, do you think there's something wrong with you?" And I was like, "I don't know if something's wrong with me, but I don't think this is right." And that's a really hard thing, because literally you want to go with your gut feeling of something is off. And we do know best if we give ourselves time to sit with it and be like, "Hang on, all of these things don't really stack up to what I think it should be." And it's really very hard to hit pause with anything, or to say to someone, "Am I going crazy? Or is this just a bit off?" And often it is just a bit off, but you just need to verbalize it and hear it from someone else, or do a little bit of investigation. and then step back from it, question it, because not everything is, bad, but it's just putting it kind of in a bit of a box together of like, ooh, there could be some correlation. And I definitely think because I have been fortunate enough to make notes, just even on my phone, of when things are just slightly out of kilter, and then you put it all together and you're like, this has been going on for far longer than it should be. So if it's going on for a long period of time, like, what's to come? And, I don't know. There's so much around it that it's just checking in with yourself, whether it's even 6 monthly of like, hang on a second, this is still going on. This is still going on. And I'm having, a couple of weeks ago, again, a little bit of flare, but with my bladder incontinence. And again, I'm now looking at some more topical estrogen, which I've got another doctor's appointment booked to again sort out with that. And that was my gynae physio. She, from the start, from my first appointment with her, was like, you need to, go get a whole stack of tests done, look at your dietary markers. That was her first thing with me, because that was at the same time as the osteoporosis scan. And so she was really no, there are other factors going on. How our breathing goes, the breathing in part with everything else. And, I've been doing meditation for years, but looking at it in this really way of not just in isolation of those practices, but how that practice then can unfurl through the rest of my life, and where you can then just kind of see the thought pass through you, process it for what it is, but don't linger on it for too long, because that's where I would have historically ultimately spiraled down. And that's everything that I'm now working towards of like, yeah, you hear it. There might be some relevancy. Earmark it, process it, ask the right questions, be okay with it. Either park it till you can deal with it, but put a definitive time on it, or just let it go. And again, it's changing your real mythology about it. And I think that comes down to, like, which we touched on earlier, of this superwoman element of the overachiever of I can do this and I can hit targets and I can be there and goal setting and I can work these problems out. And it's like, not by yourself and not all at the same time, Narelle.
Yeah, and it's not good for your bones. And so that's what we're trying. And that's what I want to pass on to the 30, 40-year-old crowd, the perimenopause world, because this, we talk about stress and you have more vibrancy, more energy. I mean, I burned the candle, not just at both ends, at 4 ends when I was in my 30s and 40s with raising 3 children, and stress without even raised awareness to it.
Yeah.
And some of what you just said, first of all, if you go into a dark room, you don't know what's in the room until you turn the light on. So raising awareness, shedding the light on what you need to observe is step 1. And then I just got back from India. I'm a yoga therapist. I think yoga has all the answers, whether it's the diet, the meditation, the movement, balance, all of it, internal, external balance. And I was studying, have you ever heard of yoga nidra?
Yeah.
Okay, so yoga nidra was one of the practices we were studying. And one of the things I brought home from this trip to India was to watch the movie screen. So if you become, the word witness really is powerful. When you can stand outside yourself, you're not emotionally attached to what's happening anymore. You're almost watching yourself be this crazy lunatic. Like, you're going to talk to yourself, Narelle, what the heck are you doing?
Be the bystander.
Be the bystander. And not because you're going to be the bystander and not take part in your life, but you're going to observe. You're going to look at yourself and see, what the heck are you doing? And that is where you can start to make those changes, because osteoporosis is an inflammatory metabolic disease. And what's happening inside, starting whenever that happens, like honestly, the whole time you've been alive, but really in the 30s and 40s, it's going to start to contributing more to bone breakdown than bone building. And so that's why we have to really monitor this. And this is not about fear. My goal is not to say, hey, ladies, you have perimenopause, you have all this other things you have to worry about in life. Now think about your bones. I just want you to be aware of your bones. Be aware of your bones and do what you could do all day to focus on bone building, stop bone dissolving, which is then going to preserve hormones. It's going to give you a better gut. It's going to help you be happier and healthier, look as good as you can for as long as you can and just have a better, happier life, which is what we all want.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I'm so pleased that that practice, all your learnings went so well in India. It's totally up my street. I've done for the last 4 years a integral healing course, and that's all the terminology that I do it now live from Akshay, and he's in India. He's Indian, and yeah, the whole tools that he has given me, he is, without a doubt, a massive part of my support network and emotional and well-being, yeah, learnings. And it is every week I learn more, and we do, this phenomenal practice. And every year every week, I should say, is a very different relevance. And it's, I think, a very powerful technique if it's something that you can harness and give time to it. And then that flows through into many other areas of your life. And that's, like I was just saying earlier, having done all of these practices this year heightened again even more of the need to put those practices into so many other facets of my day-to-day life and be able to be, again, impart and share. And he, I would say, has been a massive cheerleader as well, even for me, of being able to articulate and share and, share my message and my journey purely just to, again, potentially help somebody else just think. And I'm the same. I get these beautiful messages of, oh my gosh, you prompted me to go get this tested, prompted me to look at this, prompted me to look at that. And again, it's just a sharing. It's making the world ultimately a better, nicer, happier place, but just more pleasurable. Because I think connection, whether it's like with you guys, us meeting via podcast, interaction on socials, now doing this, that extension of something that feels so tangible but is virtual, is really, really powerful. And you can't put a price on what that gives to others, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And I always say the universe is working for you, not against you. The
Yeah.
messages are there, the people are there. And so often someone will say to me, I don't know how I found you, but I did. And I'm like, because you needed to. And
Exactly. It just
yeah,
happened.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. But you know what I would love to know from you is, what does aging look like for you now? Obviously, because you have osteoporosis. Have you reversed it completely?
So I did not have osteoporosis. I was
Oh,
1 point away. So I was a negative 2.4. And that's
okay.
because of my hip issues, my hip
Yes.
journey. And I had a total hip replacement. And when I had my DEXA scan, I was negative 2.4, which is 1 point away because negative 2.5, the diagnosis of osteoporosis
Yes.
is given. And I
Yes.
was like, no way. And so for me, yoga is everything. And I was teaching at the time 8 classes a week.
Mm,
And the reason why I got to that negative 2.4 number in my right hip is because after I had my left hip replaced, I thought, wow, it was so weak. I had to work on it. So in every class, 8 classes a week, I would actually demonstrate on my left side, on my fake hip side, my hip replacement side, this is how you do Warrior Two or Half Moon or whatever I was doing. And
mm,
so I consciously, for 2 years on that left side, would do the demonstration, which meant I had more on that side. Well,
yes.
then I had my DEXA scan and it was negative 2.4 my right hip. I think at the time, 53. I was
Okay.
1 year or 2 years into menopause. I thought, what?
Yeah.
And I was teaching yoga for osteoporosis at this time, and I was very much in the bone health world. And I thought, oh no. So I shifted, and I, just like you were talking about tracking and having markers, for the next 2 years, I did everything on my right hip because it dawned on me, this is my natural hip. This is the one that could break. This is the one I need to protect. That one is fake. Of course, I still work on my left side. I'm not going to have a weak left body because it's not just the bones, it's the muscles and the
Yeah.
flexibility. So I did everything on my right side. And my next DEXA scan, I was a negative 1.9.
Oh my
That
goodness.
is so significant to have that big
That
of a
is
change.
Oh my gosh,
And
it's huge. I know. I'm fascinated by the whole change. I mean, my T-score is minus 3.5, so you can kind of imagine how I was like,
oh, wait a
"What?"
minute. Okay, I'm gonna change your life right now. Okay, I'm gonna change your life. Osteoscan UK is in England, and when we
Yeah,
in London, and when we hang up, I want you to call and I want you to go get a
a
REMS, which is
REMS? Yeah.
ultrasound, okay? And Dr. Nick Birch, I do so much work with him. He's a spinal
Okay.
surgeon, and he is part of my mission, part of what's gonna help to globally shift the way we've been diagnosing, managing, and treating bone health up to now. I want you to go get that REMS. It's in London, and
Yeah.
he is amazing. I went and got mine in 2024 of April. I got my
Yeah.
REMS. So you're gonna go get this. It's an ultrasound. They do it
Yes.
on, your spine and on your hip, and you're gonna get those readings.
And
And
it's
let's
great because you can have them more frequently, can't you?
you
So,
grab
you know
them
how
more
we were saying
frequently. Yes.
yeah, about putting markers of time down. When my dad was here in September was when I saw my rheumatologist and I came off. I'd gone on to the bisphosphonate and I was doing that and some calcium supplements, and my rheumatologist basically said, "Look, it's fine." I was really getting quite stressed about the whole alendronic acid and again, the relevancy for age and stage of what I was. And, anyway, my dad went whilst he was here, he was like, "Right, you know what? You're getting really stressed out about all of this. We just need to take it back a level. Again, put a marker in the sand. You've only recently been diagnosed. You've got 4,000 questions going on. Rein it in," because he could see me spiraling with all my stress. And so seeing the rheumatologist, making those changes, coming off that medication, I've got a great personal trainer that I see, and different parts again, even just therapy to get my head around processing, talking to friends, family, and I heard about the REMS. I think initially it probably even might have come from you, and I was then like, right, I'm going to allocate that to something I want to do in January 25, because then that again would give me 6 months from when I was first diagnosed. I've now got my head around this whole processing part of it. The fear part, of course, it's still slightly gone. I love skiing, and that's still a big sort of question mark in my life as to what I do. But I think I've got my head around how I'm going to manage that. So that's okay. It's now not off limits for me in my head, whereas initially it was, is that off limits? Don't get me wrong. It didn't stop me wearing, crazy high heels. I still run around a bit like a lunatic in them, but that's okay. I've got good balance, touch wood. And yeah, but the REMS thing is definitely on my radar. And yeah, I'm fascinated because again, I can have it more regularly to see what might be changing. So that sounds so promising.
Oh, but even more than that, Narelle, it's not just that you could do it more often. I'm actually questioning, where are you? Because what the DEXA looks at is density.
Yeah,
Density is not a determiner of fracture. So
exactly.
that would be what scares you. I can't ski. I can't ski. The
Yeah, yeah,
ultrasound is quality and
yeah,
fracture, true rat fracture risk.
yeah.
That is what's going to tell you, be careful, or what are you doing? Get out of here and go to the Swiss Alps. Book that ski vacation.
Absolutely. I know. It's great, isn't it? And when you look at that, because obviously DEXA was the first, wasn't it? And if that was gold standard then, I think this REMS technology is phenomenal in terms of what it's going to offer up to people. And again, just to give another lens to look at things as well, isn't it? And I think, again, the interplay between all the lifestyle factors, everything, as well as just having this other baseline, it's so positive. So I'm excited about what that's going to show and what it ultimately means. But I think I've had more than enough time now, like in terms of processing time for the last however many months, of like, it's okay. I can work out what to do next, and whatever that might present, it's like that is just what it is. I kind of, obviously, you never know everything, but I'm really comfortable with what I know. And like I said, finding people like you and having that as part of this exploratory network, I think is great, because it just, there's some amazing advocates out there for understanding what bone health and the whole musculoskeletal system actually means. Because, this time last year, I was clueless.
Right. I just want women to realize the actual control they have over their bones, and we've been
Totally.
disempowered. And so that for me is what it is. You
Yeah.
asked the question about aging and what does
Yeah.
aging look like?
Yeah.
When you are in your 30s, your 40s, you have more bone density, more bone quality, more bone to work with. So
Mm.
maintain that. And that's going to be the stronger your muscles are. For me, I think yoga is amazing. If you're going to do weight training or something like that, make sure you do it correctly. Never bend your spine. Learn how to bend in your hip, not your spine. Squats, plank, and it doesn't have to be at the gym and it doesn't have to be an hour-long class. It could be squatting, practicing single leg balance. I mean, I am squatting constantly. I'm like, I'm going to stay as strong as I can, as long as I can. So making sure you do that, managing your stress, optimizing your sleep, clean up your diet. Really the biggest inflammation triggering foods we know are gluten, dairy, and sugar. Minimize those. Alcohol in moderation. And because that's also going to support your hormones. And then in the functional medicine space, I interview a lot of functional medicine physicians. The real number one course of action these days, now that we realize all of the studies, or the big study, the Women's Health Initiative on bioidentical hormone replacement, was wrong. There was a lot of flaws in it. Really, hormone replacement, bioidentical, is the first course of action by most of the functional medicine physicians. So I'm on them. And you asked me, I think, what are you doing? And for me, it's yoga every day. I check myself before I wreck myself. So I'm all about watching the stress. Yeah. Check yourself before you wreck yourself.
Check yourself before you wreck yourself. I like it.
Well, it's a song. There's a song, check yourself before you wreck yourself, like some kind of like rap song, check yourself. But it makes sense. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. Check yourself before you dissolve your bones for these years. And bam, there you are at 60 or whatever with osteoporosis.
Yeah.
Raise awareness.
No, absolutely. And again, it's the raising awareness. And I think by really understanding who you are and looking at yourself, and that whole part, I think, of even self-like, because so many people don't like themselves as well, which I generally see. And I think I was that person perhaps 7 years ago. And it took me quite a long time to be really comfortable with who I am. And, and that's the part, I think, of self-love that's the most important thing. And that, to me, is self-care, of ensuring that everything that you are doing to yourself is how you would want someone else to potentially treat you. And it's a really different mind shift to have. Because again, I think we grew up with a kind of, any focus on ourselves perhaps was a bit selfish or self-centered or self-focused, as opposed to, it's so important. It's so important to, be your biggest cheerleader, but have and be a part of a team, because we can't do it alone at all.
So crazy what you just said. So my parents are from Scotland. I'm first generation American. They have full-blown accents and everything. And all my blood is in the UK. And there's a saying that I grew up with where they would say, don't be too big for your boots. And they would say it with an accent, don't be too big for your boots. And so that was like a way to keep you down, to stifle. I mean, just because it's what they did, right? And so my whole life I lived that. And it was maybe in my 40s that I realized, wait a minute, not only am I not too big for my boots, they have always fit me. Yeah. And, now I'm in my late 50s. And what I'm going to say is that maybe for me, I started to notice things changing in my 40s, because I think this is more the population that you speak with. And I'd love to really raise awareness in this, 30s going into 40s. I think that's when I started to notice physical shifts in my looks. I think they notice it younger these days, because I have girls in their 20s. But I think I started to notice like some lines on my lips. And then I think about what are the things that happened along the way. Maybe, there's more fat, like stored energy. We could call it fat or stored energy. There's more stored energy accumulation in a certain area. But I think that as my physical appearance started to shift, I'm not going to say get worse or go down, right? I'm just going to say as it shifted. Yeah. And as it changed, that was a hard part. That was a hard time when you I had to use readers when I was in my mid 40s. I started to notice lines on my face. I started to notice the physical shifts in myself. Now, like almost 20 years into it, there's more acceptance of that. And don't get me wrong, as I get close to the 60, there's more stuff happening, more things are breaking. But it's almost like in the beginning, it's so hard initially when it's all starting in your 30s, 40s, and that's when they say that before menopause, there's about a 10-year period pre-menopause where hormones are declining. So you're going to be in the brain fog, low energy, low libido, bitchy, agitated. I used to say when I was going through that phase, like, I would be burned at the stake. I was like a witchy poo.
Oh my gosh.
But
It's
just
so
even
true.
knowing this, having this conversation, and for some woman to hear this and be like, "Oh, it's not me, it's my hormones,"
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
it's not me, it's menopause or perimenopause. But really,
Exactly. And that's
that's
the thing for you and I, it was a generation where the plethora of symptoms were not something that was really discussed. And I think for anyone in today, they're hearing it with a different narrative. And it's almost there's a lot of it that I think you would have to properly be blocking it out to detach from it. And that would be, say, I would say something again, the HRT part, which you touched on. That again was my rheumatologist was like, get off the bisphosphonates, stay on the HRT, which I had started basically at the same time as when I did the alendronic acid. And he was like, that is enough right now for you. And I've still got relative problems with some absorption in that it can take quite a long, and it's leaving a lot of sediment on my clothes, for instance. So I'm just trying to get my head around what the actual absorption of that is. And with that absorption and let's say general toxins and what we're putting in our, just putting on our skins and our environment, I've kind of gone back to revisiting all of the products again in my house and just working out what is within my actual environment that I've got control over. And, I think there's always work to be done. But for anyone looking at themselves now and all of these symptoms, it's like, the symptoms will happen and it will get better, but it does take, it can be at least a decade of all of these things. And that's where I think I'm kind of now not out the other side at all, but I think I have gone through the peak deterioration and, the peak of all of the symptoms that I just was blissfully ignorant to what I've been like, what I just thought I was kind of stacking into my own life and probably were part of like a breakdown that I had 7 years ago, but I just didn't know that all of those things that were happening, I could have potentially helped. And so HRT, again, the Women's Health Initiative, that whole study that was done, I'm glad that's all in the past now because I was not anti-HRT. My mother has been on HRT. She's going to be 80 soon. She's been on HRT for decades and decades and decades, and she looks amazing, is amazing. She is just in osteopenia range and could not have been a picture of health for what I generally look at and see. And so I was kind of like, oh, I've got good genes, this, that, and the other, like kicking it down the road. Again, just blissfully ignorant to the benefits of what any bioidentical or any hormone therapy can actually help and enhance you. And if you can have something that is a little bit of a silver lining or a magic bullet or whatever you want to call it, then definitely look into it. Definitely work out whether it is relevant to, to your life and weigh up all the pros and cons, but really consider it. Whereas I was like, I'm through it. I'm done. And I just thought it was something to help you get through it. My GP was very anti about me going on it, despite my osteoporosis, despite everything else that was going on. I had to fight to go on it. And because I was not presenting with symptoms, I was postmenopausal and postmenopausal by 4 years. So, and that was hard to hear from a female GP as well. And I was like, and that's where it's again, keep asking the questions, keep pushing, keep going with your gut, because often when something you have that visceral reaction to, it's often the right thing to keep
yeah.
investigating and doing.
Yeah, the gut knows.
Well, the
So
same. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and I think it's just a matter of finding the right, currently knowledgeable physicians because they're out there. Okay, so we are going to wrap up. We could do a part 2 on something
I
else, but
know, amazing.
I wanna end this by saying you went from blissfully ignorant to blissfully aware.
Oh my gosh, totally.
Yeah. Okay, anything you wanna say before we go?
No, just
Okay.
thank you and keep doing what you're doing. I love it. And
Okay, I love that. You didn't just say thank you and keep doing what you're doing. You said thank you and keep doing what we're doing because I Love that. I want to be in community. I don't want it to be you're there doing your little thing, me there doing my little thing. We shared people today. There's also a doctor in South England, Dr. Allie. My podcast interview with her, I don't know what number it is, but it's in the 40s or 50s.
Great.
Grimston, I think is her name, and she's in the South UK. She does a lot of hormone stuff. Like she has got so anyone listening here that's in the UK, look her up. Osteoscan in London, Dr. Nick Birch, amazing. A man that wants to empower women to take control of their own bone health. So we shared a lot of that here. I'd love to do something in the future with you where we do something where it's, this is a great interview, but we got to expand on this. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing. And thanks for sharing your story, your wisdom, and your journey, because there's going to be someone or someones or lots of women actually that are going to benefit from this.
Absolutely. Thank you. Amazing. And good luck, everyone.
Thanks for joining me on Stronger Bones Lifestyle. Are you ready to take charge of your future? For show notes, resources, and information on my programs, please visit DebbieRobinson.com. If today's episode empowered you, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs it. Together, we're building stronger bones and stronger lives. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.